well, without any further ado, I am going to introduce our speakers, and they said they wanted to have a very brief introduction. So, I'm going to present to you our current presiding judge, Joe Fannin, and our incoming presiding judge, Baskin. You ready to take it away?
Welcome everybody. We're very happy to be here. I know it's the end of the day, so we'll try to keep it as lively as possible, although mostly it'll be lecture. We'll do try to break it up a little bit. So today we're talking about implicit bias in the courtroom. And Judge Baskin and I frequently teach new judges orientation. And that's a one-week mandatory course for new judges that includes fairness and ethics and sort of managing the courtroom. And we do lengthy stretches in that course on implicit bias as it affects bench officers, whether it's how you're treating self-represented litigants or how you're ruling from the bench, whatever it is. It affects us in a million different ways. So we're very happy to take the lessons we've learned there and sort of adapt it to implicit bias for lawyers in the courtroom. Hopefully today, before you leave, everyone will agree we all have implicit biases. We will demonstrate that to you. You will understand that when you're more likely to act on them and how you can avoid it. And we'll have strategies on how you can work with that. And what I'd like to start with is why it's imperative for you, each of you, to think about implicit biases within your practice, because it impacts your practice, every single person here. Legally, it impacts you because of the new rule of professional responsibility that was just enacted November 1st, Rule 8.4.1. This rule is broader than what I'm going to be talking about. It encompasses prohibited discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. But what I want to focus on is that it prohibits you as attorneys in representing a client and in relation to the law firm operation from unlawfully discriminating against any person on the basis of any protected characteristic. Protected characteristic is very broadly defined, so stick with me, it's a long definition. Race, religion, color, national origin, ancestry, physical disability, mental disability, medical condition, genetic information, marital status, sex, gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, military veteran status, or any other category of discrimination prohibited by applicable law, whether the category is actual or perceived. So, you may not discriminate against anyone based on those characteristics, all right? Now, the reason that plays into implicit bias is, we all know if you have explicit bias, if you're biased against a racial group, that could lead to unlawful discrimination. But you might not think about your implicit biases could lead to unlawful discrimination. Let's say you're not really conscious that you have a bias against pregnant women. Well, if you're not aware of it, you still could be liable for unlawful discrimination if it turns out you are discriminating, and the reason is you've got this underlying bias. So it's imperative that you think about your biases because it could land you in big trouble. And I love the comment on the rule, why this new rule is so important. They say conduct that violates this rule undermines confidence in the legal profession and our legal system, and is contrary to the fundamental principle that all people are created equal. So it's really, really critical that we think about our biases because, of course, we want to treat everyone equally, and we want to uplift our profession and not degrade it. Now, I want you to also be aware that Judge Baskin and I, and every other judge, has a duty to enforce these rules in the courtroom. Our equivalent to your professional rules of conduct are canons, and the applicable canon is Canon 3B6. And that canon states that a judge shall require lawyers in proceedings before the judge to refrain from manifesting by words or conduct bias, prejudice, or harassment based on the protected characteristics. The protected characteristics here are pretty much the same as in your rule, but we have a few more. And they are, so you cannot manifest bias, prejudice, or harassment based on socioeconomic status or political affiliation. So we're to police that in the courtroom and in chambers, and we're also to make sure that you refrain from any sexual harassment against parties, witnesses, counsel, or others. So implicit bias can sound sort of like fluff, but it's not fluff. It's real, and it can have real world implications. So we hope you stick with us to the end. Thanks.
I'm just going to add a few little notes to what Jill just said. When we teach this course to new judges over a week, this section that we are teaching right now, we take about 6 hours to do. And we struggled when we heard that this was what we were being asked to present here in about 50 minutes. So you understand that if we're just scratching the surface of what's involved in this study, you will forgive us. And the other thing I want to emphasize, I brought with me this Law Journal article. It's a fabulous article, co-authored in part by a well-known out-of-state federal judge about the effects of implicit bias in the courtroom. It's about 55 pages long. It cites other psychiatric reports. It's really a very detailed thing about every part of criminal and civil cases. So if you're all out there and you're all thinking, well, you're fair people, you're all fair-minded people, otherwise you wouldn't be as successful as you all are, you'd be missing the point. Because success has nothing to do, very little to do, with implicit bias in the courtroom. And if you become aware of the many ways in which you can get snagged by this, leaving aside the legalities that Jill was referring to, just trying to be more successful at what you're doing, eliminating implicit bias and definitely express explicit bias is definitely one of the goals you want to accomplish. Also, having said that, neither Jill nor I, nor for that matter any lawyer or judge, are really qualified to teach this course. I've been teaching it for 12 years, and the more I teach it, the more I realize how little we know about this subject. It's really to be taught by someone with a PhD and years of training in social sciences. And we've sort of taken our take from decades of study about implicit bias, and we're giving you our take on it. It affects you every day that you appear in front of a judge with or without a jury in a criminal case, in a probate case, family law matter, juvenile matter, it doesn't matter. Your implicit biases are going to be observed by others. If you're in front of a jury, it'll be observed by the jurors, it'll be observed by your opponents, and perhaps even the judge, as Jill was saying. We have an obligation, if it crosses a line, to address it. And you all know the Johnson, Batson, Wheeler line of cases. When it comes to jury selection, there are express prohibitions of manifesting your biases in the form of jury questions. So we're going to try to touch on this, and I'm going to turn it over to Jill to talk a little more about the definition of bias, and then I'm going to talk a little more about social cognition after that.
So bias is, we have it up here, and is anything that reflects stereotypes, right, about what's going on with someone. Cultural assumptions and preconceptions about people or groups of people. Of course, a bias can be favorable, and you have to watch out for those, as well as watching out for the negative biases or stereotypes we might have. It's very important that you, just because, like you think, oh, well, I really like that law firm. Well, that's, check yourself then. Or, you don't like that opposing counsel when you get it, or that firm. Well, that's a bias, Make sure you're not acting on something without evidence of it. You need to have evidence every single time. Otherwise, you're acting on a bias. You're acting on a preconception. And each time you kind of get into that automatic mode, you need to think about it and look at yourself and see if that makes sense or not.
If I may jump in on that. For example, Jill was saying positive implicit bias. You mustn't think just because it's positive that it's going to not be negative for you to act on that. So for example, perhaps some people have a stereotype view that Asians may be more intelligent or better at math or something like that. And they might think that that's okay because that's a positive thing to think about that group. Well, maybe it is. But if you act on that in a courtroom, if you act on that way when you're perhaps selecting a jury, or perhaps you're talking to a judge that may be Asian, that kind of behavior may well be seen as offensive.
It is offensive.
So that's what we're talking about. It doesn't matter whether it's a positive or negative, if it's a stereotype and it's a bias, implicit or even explicit, you have to try to avoid that. So what are we talking about with social cognition? So social cognition, which is behind what we're talking about here, is the categorization of and preference for people based on a group identity. It's a normal and fundamental, even unavoidable process that happens in our brain. Whether you want it to happen or not, it happens. Our ability to categorize our experience as an indispensable cognitive device for understanding, negotiating, and constructing our social world. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when you see someone, not someone you know, but someone you don't know, within fractions of a second, you are already processing and your biases come out within fractions of a second. It's like a high-speed computer. You can't stop it even if you wanted it to. The brain identifies within a fraction of a second 3 things: race, age, and gender. Those 3 things, whether you like it or not, that's what your brain will do. And then what you do after those milliseconds have gone by will depend on your lifetime of experience, positive or negative, and you will react based on what you do, based on that. So these synapses in the brain, social scientists refer to them as schemas. So during the process of categorization, our brains encode information about groups into our memories, along with favorable or unfavorable memories or values. And those constructs are sometimes called schemas. So it's just like a computer. These mental processes can be likened to computer hardware. So what goes into that hardware differs from person to person based on your experience. But we all process, code, store, and retrieve the data that we receive similarly. So this is an involuntary process, and one of the exercises that we do at New Judge Orientation, I actually enjoy this part, you'll see why it takes 6 hours to do this whole presentation, is we get all the male judges into one corner of the room, and in the opposite corner of the room we get all female judges. And we ask them to go back to their kindergarten or elementary school years and picture that they were as they were then. And then on a butcher paper, we get the male group to write down all the positive attributes when they were that age that they had of the opposite sex. So the male side, they're going to be writing down on that butcher paper all the positive aspects of women. Then, when they finish that, they'll write down on the negative side all the negative things that they had in their minds about women. Girls, young girls, obviously, elementary school age. And the women do the same. So they do the same exercise. And the beauty of the exercise gets revealed at the end of it when you look at the list. And I've been doing this for 12 years, and it is always this way. On the male side of the room, on the negative qualities for the females, there's a much longer list, much longer, probably double the size of the positive qualities that they could come up with that they had back then, right? On the women's side, it's not quite as bad, but still bad. Their list of negative qualities outweigh the positive qualities, not by double, but on average more than the positive qualities. And you all sitting there as the judges are sitting when we teach this, wondering why do we bother going through that exercise? What does that have to do with anything? Well, as I said, these schemas that you have, that has to do, and we're trying to show you that has to do with the hard wiring that you had when you were growing up. That is just the way it was. And so that is the background you come from. That is the hard wiring that you grew up with. And yes, in today's time with political correctness, some of us have sensitized ourselves, have become more aware, taken things out of the realm of implicit biases into the realm of explicit biases that we're aware of, and hopefully over time perhaps even worked on removing those. It's interesting because you would think that if you're going back to a time when you were 6 or 8 years of age and we're now decades later, that this would have no impact on you, but it does. And we'll do an exercise or two, hopefully we'll have time to talk about that and show you actually with an exercise here about how this process works in the brain that's unavoidable. All right, so now we're going to go straight into this exercise. What I'm going to do now is we're going to show you about this brain of yours and how it processes data. The way we're going to do it is we won't be doing it with reference to sex or race or anything like that. Instead, we're going to do it with words. I'm going to put words up here, and at the end of it, you'll see. But what I want you to do with the words as they come up there is just make a note of those words as they come up. All right? So here is the first group of words that are going to come up. That's the end of the first group. Now we're going to go into a second group of words. I want you to again pay attention to the words that come up. The next group, here we go. this might be the last group, but here it comes. Oh, still one more group here. Next group. All right, so now we're going to have a little test. And what Jill and I are going to do with the help of some of you, hopefully, is we're going to hand out a little memory test. I hope you've all got your pens from your things here. And we're not going to ask you to hand this back to us. This isn't a grading thing. This is not a competitive thing either. Yeah. If we could get some help with handing it out, there's a lot of tables that make sure that everybody gets one. Maybe you can also hand out some.
And there, what you're doing, you're going to check mark next to a word that showed up there.
Yes. When you get this form, as soon as you get the form, look at the form, and you're going to check off next to the words that were up there. Oh, thank you. Raise your hand if you haven't got any forms yet.
Teresa behind you.
No, you're going to just ask, are you looking for a word that's not being shown? No. You're going to put a check mark next to the words that you believe were just put up here on the screen. Check mark will be placed next to words that you saw up here when I was going through the various groups. If you saw it up there, you're going to put a check mark next to it. More forms? I've got more forms. There's 12 words that were put in front of you there. By a show of hands, could somebody who checked off all 12 raise their hand? Okay. I'd say about half of you checked off 12. How many checked off 11? Good number. How many checked off 10? Getting less. How many checked off 9? All right. How many checked off 8? 7? 6? 5? 4? 1 hand for 4? 3? 2 hands for 3? 1? 2 and 1? No, don't take this. So, that lady at the back there with 4.
I think she misunderstood. I misunderstood. I'm sorry. I got all of them.
Okay. So we had nobody with 4. So the interesting thing is half the room said 12. So what are we getting at with here? What did we notice in these groups that were put up? There was an association right? Those of you who checked 12 were processing the data just like we said the brain is trained to do. So you associated with things that you were comfortable relating to. So if it was a sofa and there was a chair, so then all those things related to you. So in this group there, wherever you checked off, you thought these things were all up there because they were grouped with other things that sounded the same as what they were. So now you want to know what the right answer is, and here it is. I told you this wasn't competitive, but just to illustrate the point. Only 4 words were actually shown in those many words that were put up. And those are the 4. So in this case. And maybe, I haven't checked this because we emailed this program, it's possible that there was a computer programming error.
That's what they said in Florida.
I haven't gone back to check.
That's what they said in Florida.
But no matter, I'll grant you that maybe some of those words were there, at least I thought some of them were. But just to make you feel better, when you do this with a room full of judges over the 12 years, I've been teaching it, only 2 judges have guessed the 4 words and recalled the 4 words. And in both those 2 cases, very rare cases, not all 4 correctly. So nobody's ever gotten all 4 correctly when I've been teaching. Nobody. So even if you think the program is wrong, and it may be, I haven't checked it, and I will hopefully find that it isn't in error. But that is how the results come, and the results are like that because you all associate things in that way. So we'll move on from that, and I will check this program afterwards to make sure you did it right. And we're also going to talk about the in and out groups. This is another way that people discriminate and have implicit biases.
I will say in our NJO group, I've had it twice where people got the right, and this is correct. And they've got it correct because they do an unusual way of processing that most of us don't do. And what they do is, let's say they're talking about the couch, the chair, whatever. They picture a room with those items in it. And then when they're looking at it, they recall that image. So it's just a different way of thinking. Most of us, I was in the 12 version, you know, I'm like, oh, close enough, you know, it's related. So on in-group versus out-group, this is another way that we process information. And again, this is stuff that we learn as children. We tend to like people and prefer them if they're like us. And we tend to have more negative thoughts about people who are different than us. Now, they might not be negative, but they're not as positive. Okay, we tend to like people who are in our in-group and be more suspicious of the out-group. I think this goes to the whole tribe mentality. You know, this was important back when we were cavemen and women, and you had to be wary of other groups. And so it's hardwired into how we think about it. And one thing that's interesting about this process that we all naturally go through is that we see people in our group as individuals, and we see people in the other group as homogeneous. You know, they're all the same. We paint them with a broad brush. Our group, oh my God, you can't tell us apart. We're so different. You know, we don't even see ourselves often as a group. It has to be pointed out. we are about. There are many reasons in here why we're all in the in-group. We're in the in-group because probably everyone here graduated from high school. Probably everyone or got a GED. Most of us got college degrees. Most of us got law degrees. We're Californians, and now whether we were before, there's a lot of reasons why we're all together. But I want to focus on the legal aspect, okay, to show you the in-group, out-group dynamic and how it works. So if you would, get out a pencil, and on that same piece of paper, flip it over. And I want you to think about, as a lawyer, how many legal specialties or practice areas can you think of? And I'm going to give you 25 seconds. Go. Practice areas, legal specialties. So how many of you wrote down 5 or more? How many of you wrote down 8 or more? How many of you wrote down 10 or more? Okay, and some of you probably could have written more if I would have given you more time, right? Okay, so if you would, write down, here are some legal practice areas, for example. And as we know, that's, just the tip of the iceberg, right? Okay, so please, the same thing for dentistry, fields of dentistry, go.
25 seconds.
Okay, most of you stopped writing. All right, so how many of you got 5 or more? 8 or more? Did anyone get 10 or more?
So you notice the stark contrast when we're talking about the in-group, which we're all members of, and dentistry, which none of us are members of, and apparently collectively very little about.
Well, but the thing is, when you see this, you know these things. You just don't remember it. You don't focus on it because it's not your tribe. Okay?
So we're going to put 10 in. That's the 10 areas. So just as many as the legal profession.
So again, the mental schema of how we think about things is we categorize things, and then it becomes hardwired for us. And it's like a computer. And this social science, this goes back to the thing Gary was talking about our class, or our groups for NJO. What happens with kids identify about the in-group, when they're just babies. They learn who their tribe is, they learn right away. And the preferences become automatic, and it colors your worldview. That's how we grow up. We can change our worldview, but this is why it happens. And it's automatic, and it's about, we've all heard about confirmation bias. As we grow up, we have confirmation bias all the time. We tend to readily accept information that feeds into our own worldview, that my group of people from Canola is best, and then the worldview that people that aren't from Canola aren't as good, okay, or whatever it is. We tend to automatically think like that. judges in the different corners, the women writing down the stereotypes of boys, the boys writing down stereotypes. The girls had the same stereotypes, and the boys had the same stereotypes of each other. They knew what they were, cooties and all that. But then you get a little more serious, and that's a few years ago I did a talk on Lean In for lawyers. Sheryl Sandberg spoke about how women kind of unintentionally hold ourselves back. And the thought is that what we do is we've internalized some of the negative stereotypes. That, well, women aren't supposed to ask for a raise. We're supposed to be nice. You know, we're not supposed to always want the promotion. Or we're not supposed to do certain things. And so, and I've seen it in a courtroom where female associates, I'll ask them a direct question and they'll look to their boss to see if they can answer. When I do that to a male associate, they don't look over their shoulder. And it's, you know, these biases that we have, they can be positive or negative, we can internalize them. It's not just always looking outward, we need to look inward to see how we've grown up and what our worldview is. Another important thing is that, as I said, this is confirmation bias, or kind of the opposite. If you find something that is inconsistent with your worldview, what we tend to do is say, we don't tend to just automatically change our worldview. Instead, we say, well, that's an exception. You know, whatever it is, like Asians are great at math. Well, and then you meet someone who's not, and you say, oh, well, that's an exception. As opposed to saying, throw the whole thing out. You know, it takes us a while to throw out the stereotype. Sometimes you have to look at it. And as this says, it's especially true when the out group is big and we have a negative view.
Can I digress
Yes,
for
yes.
1 second? All of you recognize at some level that there is this implicit bias, and that's revealed in the way you dress. Simple as that. When you go to a courtroom, be it a bench trial, or especially if it's a jury trial, the way you dress is because you already have in your mind formed some kind of view about how jurors are going to see you. And so you dress to present the image of whatever stereotype that you might think they were looking at. Some good suit, good smart clothing, good dress, whatever it is that you might think would impress. But what you might be overlooking when you're doing that is you might overlook that a juror's implicit bias, or maybe even explicit bias, towards lawyers is that they are tricky, misleading, and you might be feeding into that bias when you ask questions that are confusing, that are compound, that are the kinds of misleading things that they're expecting you to ask. So these kinds of biases affect you in the courtroom. So no, very few people come into the courtroom dressed as a hippie. Well, you laugh, but here in our county, we have a very good lawyer who does appear in criminal cases and is very effective, comes in with a suit, but has what you would describe, or a juror's stereotype might describe as a hippie kind of hairdo. And the interesting thing he does, very first thing he does when he gets on his feet, he asks jurors the similar kind of question. Are you all making an assumption here in the courtroom, you know, about the guilt of my client? And of course, you know, many hands go up. And he goes, and then how many of you think of me as a hippie here in the courtroom? And of course, many hands go up. And he goes, well, of course, that's normal, that's human. All of you would think that. I've got hair, like a 60s hippie, I look like that. But I'm just going to ask you to keep an open mind about the innocence or guilt of my client, because what I look like and what I do has got nothing to do with the innocence or guilt of my client. And it's kind of interesting that he uses that, perhaps that's his little shtick, having that hippie thing, and you come to court thinking, oh, this is an easy walkover, and it turns out to be anything but that, because it's quite an effective tool for extracting from the jurors their implicit or explicit biases. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I do think it's very important that as you're thinking about these things, we want to focus on your implicit bias in the courtroom, but you also have to be aware that other people can be biased against you for certain reasons, and then figure out how you're going to tackle that. And a lot of times being outright with it and saying, but there's no evidence to support that is a good strategy. So when we have implicit biases for or against people, our nonverbal behavior often shows it. And you really need to be aware of it. If you, are smiling at the juror that you think is like you and you think they're going to be friendly, well, guess what? They will be friendly. And then you look at a juror that you don't think is going to be friendly for whatever reason. Maybe it's because you're doing this, And so a lot of times you need to check yourself and see if you are unconsciously creating a self-fulfilling prophecy about what's going on.
All right, so we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that we touch on this, because one of the things that I come up against when we teach the judges all have gone through, as you all know, an arduous process to get where they got. And so a lot of them have either expressly said to us, why are you teaching us this? We got to where we got because we are fair and we are free of biases, implicit or explicit. And why are we wasting time with this course and teaching us that? And to them, and to you now, I refer to this because this is a revelation. It was for me when I did it. This is a scientific test that was designed to figure out whether you do in fact have implicit biases. It's created by the Harvard group that created it. That's the website. I think it's also in the written materials that you got for today's course. I hope some of you did it before you came today, and then you understand what we're talking about. If you're at all interested in this, and you should be, because it will affect your ability to be successful. You already are. And so if you want to be even more successful, this is a little tool that you go to, you fill out this form. It doesn't take you a whole lot of time, and you will be surprised to see that even though many of you may feel that you don't have any implicit biases, this will prove to you that you're wrong, that you have them. And if you have them, they will affect you.
Well, what I want to say about that is, just because you have an implicit bias doesn't mean you act on it. Okay, we all have the opportunity not to. The point is to recognize if you do, and then think about it, because there's ways we can strategize not to act on our biases.
Right, so one of the ways to think about these biases, if you do know that you have some, those would be explicit. But if you find from doing this test that you have implicit ones, then you have to think of the next step, because when you have implicit biases, stereotypes that surface in your mind are like heat-seeking missiles, literally. You're in search of confirming information. So if you have a bias that a particular group, African American, Asian, whatever it is, have particular tendencies, if you have this implicit bias, you're going to be looking for the facts that confirm that, rather than figuring out what all the facts are, not just the ones that relate to your trying to do it. So the problem is, because of the schemas that we're talking about, the milliseconds that it takes to process, act, and react to information like that, there is the likelihood that we can behave and communicate or judge others in ways that reflect implicit bias, and it increases under certain circumstances, and it decreases in others. And studies have shown that your ability to be neutral and to push aside biases almost disappears in situations of great stress. Is a courtroom a calm and collected place to be? No. Most of you are under stress because the courtroom is just that kind of environment. But also it could be at work, it could be anywhere else where you have had a bad night, you're going through a bad patch, you've got something else happening in your personal life, and your fuse is not as good and as patient and as long as it always was. When that happens again, the ability to be free of this disappears. We're running out of time, and I'm sure you're glad to hear that because it's the end of a long, long day and you will get your credit for this course. But I think it's probably best for us to leave a little bit of time for any of you who want to ask questions. We've probably got a few minutes where we can do that if there are any questions. Looks like everybody walked off and there is one.
All right, so if I'm aware of my biases, then it's no longer implicit. So what are implicit doing no time? Give me an example of a strategy to resist being influenced by implicit bias, which by definition I'm not aware of.
All right, so let's take a hypothetical. Let's say you're explicitly aware that when you are dealing with, let's say, an African American, and you were in a criminal voir dire situation, perhaps you're concerned about the fact that this particular group might have sympathies that are in favor of the defendant and against police, because their life experience in your mind might be that. So if you're explicitly aware of that, then you're going to try to not act on that and act out with that and ask questions not of those jurors, but of all the groups of jurors, not focusing on that particular group. But the caveat, as I said, is when you're under stress, you might be less sensitive to that, more prone to just act with your hard wiring.
I would say you can ask colleagues if you're in a courtroom setting, did I handle all the witnesses the same? Or you could ask the courtroom staff, because maybe you don't know that you're smiling more or nodding more or showing greater comfort with a certain witness or a certain kind of person. So asking people makes you more accountable. You can try checking, like you in family law or mediation. Did I do the same thing with a different gender? Would I do the same if it was male or female? Would I do the same if it was younger or older? You can try to flip the script and see if you would do the same thing. And if you start seeing a pattern, well, then there's a problem there.
Any other questions?